Something had been stealing from the sea. Along the central coast of British Columbia, traps set beneath the water kept turning up on shore, torn open and emptied of bait. The traps were meant to catch an invasive crab. Some stayed submerged even at low tide. So the obvious suspect was an animal that lived in the ocean. Then a hidden camera recorded the thief. It was not a seal. It was not an otter. It was a wolf. The wolf walked into the water, took a floating buoy in her mouth and carried it to the beach. But the food was not inside the buoy. It was hidden in a trap below the surface, connected by a long line. The wolf dropped the buoy, found the line and pulled. Then she moved backward, grabbed a new section and pulled again. She repeated the sequence until an object she could not see emerged from the sea. Then she opened the bait cup and ate. The video may be the first published evidence of potential tool use by a wild member of the dog family. Or it may not be tool use at all. That disagreement is what makes the footage more important than a clever theft. Because to decide what this wolf did, we have to ask a question science still struggles to answer. What does an animal need to understand before we call it intelligent? This story begins not with wolves, but with crabs. European green crabs are invasive predators in parts of coastal North America. They disturb sediment, damage eelgrass habitat and consume native shellfish. In Halesach Nation territory, guardians were using baited traps as part of an effort to monitor and control them. Beginning in 2023, some of those traps were repeatedly damaged. The bait cups had been ripped apart. Traps that had been placed in the water were found on shore. In several locations, the traps were too deep to be exposed even by the lowest tide. Whoever was taking them had to retrieve them from underwater. At first, a marine mammal seemed like the best explanation. But the damage left no signature that solved the mystery. So researchers placed motion-triggered cameras along the beach. One camera eventually recorded a sequence that lasted only minutes, but contained an entire chain of actions. A female wolf entered the frame near the water. She carried the trap's floating buoy in her mouth and brought it onto the beach. That alone was not enough. The buoy was only a marker. The bait remained sealed inside a trap below the surface. The wolf released the buoy. She picked up the line attached to it. Then she pulled. When one pull did not bring the trap all the way in, she did not abandon the attempt. She walked down the exposed line, gripped another section and pulled again. Step by step, the line accumulated on the beach. At last, the submerged trap crossed the boundary between two worlds. It broke the surface and scraped onto the shore. The wolf opened the bait cup and consumed what was inside. This was not a single bite at an object already holding food. The reward was separated from the wolf by water, distance and a chain of connected parts. Buoy, line, trap, cup, bait. The scientific question was whether the wolf understood that chain, or had simply learned a successful sequence through trial and repetition. For much of human history, tool use was treated as a line separating us from every other animal. That line did not survive observation. Chimpanzees use stems to fish for termites. Sea otters use stones to open shellfish. New Caledonian crows shape plant material into probes. Tool behavior has now been documented across primates, birds, mammals, fish, and invertebrates. But every new example creates a definition problem. Does an animal have to hold an object? Does it need to modify the object? Must the object be detached from the environment? Does pulling a human-made line count if the line is already connected to the reward? Under some definitions, the wolf manipulated an external object to change the position of another object and gain access to food. That can qualify as tool use. Under stricter definitions, the connected buoy and line may be treated as parts of the trap rather than independent tools. In that view, the wolf performed sophisticated extractive foraging, but did not use a tool. The researchers chose their title carefully, Potential Tool Use by Wolves. That word matters. The video records behavior. It does not record the wolf's thoughts. We can see the sequence. We can test what physical relationships were present. We can compare the act with published definitions. But we cannot look inside the animal's mind and watch a concept form. Calling the behavior potential tool use is not weakness. It is precision. And even if the strictest definition rejects the label, the most interesting part remains. The wolf solved the problem. Imagine the scene from the wolf's position. The smell of bait is present, but the bait itself is hidden. The floating buoy is visible, but it contains no food. Pulling the buoy changes nothing immediately. Only after enough line has been retrieved does the trap appear. The relationship is delayed. That delay is important because many simple foraging actions produce instant feedback. Tear open a container, and the food is there. Turn over a rock, and prey is exposed. Here, one action had to be repeated before the reward became visible. The paper's authors argue that the sequence suggests a sophisticated understanding of the trap. But suggests is not proves. The wolf may have built the behavior gradually. Perhaps she first encountered a trap already exposed by the tide and learned that it contained bait. Later, she found a trap in shallow water and discovered that pulling the line moved it closer. Repeated experience could turn separate discoveries into a smooth routine. That explanation would still be remarkable. Learning through experience is not the opposite of intelligence. It is one of its engines. Humans rarely solve a complex machine at first sight. We pull, test, fail, remember and refine. An animal does not become less intelligent because its knowledge was earned through contact with the world. The real distinction is between a lucky accident and a stable, flexible solution. The footage alone cannot tell us how many attempts came before. But the surrounding evidence adds weight. Multiple traps had been retrieved and damaged in similar ways. And on February 14, 2025, a different wolf was recorded pulling a line attached to a partially submerged trap. That second observation does not prove a shared tradition. We do not know whether one wolf watched another, whether both learned independently, or how many individuals were involved in the other damaged traps. It does show that the complete filmed event was not the only interaction of its kind. Wolves are social hunters with excellent memory, flexible movement, and a powerful ability to learn from landscapes. But wild cognition is difficult to study. An animal in a controlled experiment may face dozens of carefully designed puzzles while researchers watch every attempt. A wild wolf can cross vast territory and perform an unusual behavior once, at night, beyond any camera. Absence of evidence may therefore reflect absence of observation. The paper also raises a more uncomfortable possibility: many wolves do not live in conditions that allow exploration. In the study area, wolves face relatively low levels of human persecution compared with many populations elsewhere. The authors propose that when an animal spends less time avoiding people, it may have more freedom to investigate unfamiliar objects and develop new behaviors. That is a hypothesis, not a result proven by this video. But it changes the question. Instead of asking why wolves have not shown us more, we might ask how often fear prevents animals from revealing what they can do. Intelligence is not performed in a vacuum. It is expressed under pressure, opportunity, and time. A raven with access to objects can experiment. An otter with shellfish and stones can develop a technique. A wolf living beside a changing coast can encounter a human-made system and discover that one visible object leads to an invisible reward. Behavior emerges from the meeting point between a mind and an environment. The most important human role in this story belongs to the Halezak Nation Guardians and the research partnership working in their territory. The cameras were not placed to manufacture a viral animal puzzle. They were part of practical stewardship around an invasive species problem. That matters because major discoveries often begin with attention to local change. A damaged trap is easy to dismiss. A second damaged trap becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a question. And a carefully placed camera turns the question into evidence. The wolf was not cooperating with an experiment. She was living in a landscape where indigenous stewardship, invasive species management, human equipment and wild behavior intersected. The result is more honest than a laboratory trick because no one asked the wolf to perform. But it is also less controlled. Researchers do not know the animal's full history with the traps. They cannot replay the exact moment with a different line, a different buoy or an empty trap. They cannot yet test whether the behavior transfers to a new setup. Those are the experiments that could separate memorized routine from flexible understanding. Would the wolf follow a line placed at a new angle? Would she choose the correct line when two were present? Would she retrieve a trap without the smell of bait? Would another wolf learn by watching? Until those questions are answered, the footage remains what good science often is, not a final verdict, but a better problem. There is a temptation to make the headline larger than the evidence. Wolves use tools is clean. A wolf may have performed behavior that fits some definitions of tool use is less dramatic. But the cautious version leads to the more interesting documentary. If the action counts as tool use, it expands the published record for wild canids. If it does not, it still reveals a wolf managing a delayed, multi-stage connection between a floating marker and hidden food. Either way, the animal did not need our label before she sold the trap. Humans build categories because categories help us compare minds. Nature keeps producing behaviors that refuse to stay inside them. The question is not whether this wolf became human for 3 minutes. The question is whether our old picture of a wolf was too small. On a dark beach in Halesach territory, a camera watched a wolf pull a piece of the ocean toward her. First the buoy, then the line, then the invisible trap, then the reward. The sequence was simple enough to watch and difficult enough to explain. Maybe it was a tool. Maybe it was something just outside the definition. But intelligence is not made real by the name we give it. Sometimes it appears as a hand shaping a stick. Sometimes as a crow bending a wire. And sometimes as a wolf standing at the edge of the sea, pulling on a line because she has learned that the world continues beyond what she can see. Subscribe to Creature Cosmos for true stories of animals that make the familiar